Oops, I think I had it myself here. Hey, Ariel, hold on a second. I have to go back. I forgot to go back. Hold on. Previous laws. I'm still in the laws of Arvis. Okay. I think we're holding law number 17. We're learning about the laws of Shabbos. The next laws are very interesting. Those are the laws of Kiddush. Yes, we're holding law number 17 in the laws of Shabbos, connected to the prayer Friday night on Shabbos, or the prayers on Shabbos. So law number 17 says like this: Afilu lo yischil, even if we're talking about a person who's making a mistake. We're in the middle of this conversation. If you make a mistake while you're davening, we're all accustomed more to pray in the week. We daven 6 times a week, the weekly prayers. So comes Shabbos, sometimes we make the mistake and we'll go into what we're more accustomed to, which is the weekly prayer. So what do we do in such a case? So he says like this: let's say you start the weekly blessing and you just said one word. So do you stop and just go back to the Shabbos blessing if you catch yourself? He says no. Even if even if you remember right away, Sarach ligmor kol habracha. You should finish the entire blessing. And chutz bracha atachonen, unless you're talking about the first blessing. I mean to say the first of the middle blessings. All the blessings during the week and Shabbos have the first 3 and the last 3 blessings, which is Magen Avram, Mechayim Eisim, and Hakel HaKadosh. Then we start with the requests. In the week we start with Atachonen. So if you said one word, and let's say you said the whole Atachonen, and you start one word of the next blessing, and you just said one word and you remembered, so you have to complete the blessing and then go into the Shabbos, where depending if it's morning, afternoon, or evening. But if you said just Ata from Atachonen, She'im lo yomer adain rak tevas Ata, if you only said Ata. So he says, Kivan shegam tfilas arvis umincha maschilin Ata. So because, even though your mind was to say Atachonen, because on Shabbos, the first blessing of Shabbos is Ata, is Ata Kidashta, you've made holy. And the first word of Mincha is Ata Echad. So if you just said the word Ata, even if your mind is thinking about Atachonen, which is the weekly blessing, even Shekam Tfilas Arvis Mincha, because the evening prayer and the afternoon prayer, Maschilim Ba'ata, also start with Ata. If this happens to you when you're davening the evening or afternoon prayer, means evening Friday night or Shabbos afternoon, as afalpi sheshachach shehu Shabbos, even though you don't remember that it's Shabbos, or you're not conscious of that at least. Ata al das leimer atachonen. You said Ata with the intention to say Atachonen, but you caught yourself after you said the word Ata. So do you have to continue just saying Atachonen, finish the blessing, and then reversing back to the blessing of Shabbos? So he says, Im niskar miyachu Shabbos, if you immediately remember that it's Shabbos, and therefore you could apply the word Ata to the Shabbos part of the blessing, and it's you don't have to continue the Atachonen, Elagomer v'omer kidashta or Ata Echad. So you could just continue with the Shabbos. It means, say, even though that when you started the word Ata, you meant to say Chonen thinking that it's the week. Nevertheless, because the words are anyways on Ata, we say Ata by the evening and the morning and the afternoon. So then you could continue saying Ata Kidashta in the evening or Ata Echad in the afternoon. V'im Eirolai came b'Shachris. What happens if it happens in Shachris? Shachris, the first blessing, doesn't start with the word Ata. The first blessing starts with Yismach Moshe. So if he said Ata thinking that's the week, and because there's no way to apply the word Ata to the blessing because the blessing doesn't start with the word Ata, You must first finish the blessing of Atachonen. But if you know that it's Shabbos, and really you should have said Yismach Moshe, just so to say your mouth got ahead of you. But just because you got accustomed, you said Ata, even though you meant to say Yismach Moshe, then you don't have to finish it. You switch to Yismach Moshe. Because there are blessings in Shabbos that start with Ata, means to say this only applies to the first blessing. If you were to make this mistake in the second blessing, Shiva or A, whatever, then there's nothing you could do. You have to finish the blessing. It's as if because your mind was on Shabbos, so it's just as if you made a mistake within the Shabbos blessings themselves, and that's not so bad. Because you were conscious. Yad over here means consciousness. Because you were conscious of Shabbos, you only said the word Ata, and because it could be also applied to the evening or afternoon blessings, so therefore you don't have to go back. So what we're saying over here is like this. What we're talking about here, and this kind of finishes, we have a few more laws about mistakes. This happens all the time. Like I said, it happens all the time because we pray 3 times a day. And so there's 2 questions here. One question is if you're focused on Shabbos. What does it mean? You know that you're in your Shabbos clothing. You obviously, it's not like you're not aware of the fact that it's Shabbos. You're just not, you're not focused at all on the Shabbos while you're praying. Your mind is totally somewhere else. So sometimes your mind is somewhere else. So you're not in Shabbos. So you start saying the weekly blessing. If you said Ata in the morning without having an awareness of Shabbos while you're standing there before God, so then you have to finish the blessing, and then afterwards you start the blessing for the morning, which starts with Yismach Moshe. However, if you are aware of Shabbos, just again, your mouth gets ahead of you. So then, because there could have been a blessing that you would start Ata, for instance, if you're davening the evening service of Shabbos or the afternoon service of Shabbos, if you just said the word Ata and you caught your mouth, so to say, because your awareness was that there was Shabbos, so then it's not. You don't have to continue the blessing, and you would just switch to Yismach Moshe. Okay. So we'll do the footnotes on this. I believe the first footnote is 49. Okay. He says that you need to complete the Atachon, and is talking about. He says like this: Mariv or Mincha prayers, even though if it got it was Shabbos and you began with the word Ata. With intention to say Atachonen, but you remember immediately that it was Shabbos, you need not complete the bracha Atachonen. Prima Gadim is the one who rules that if you said the word Ata in the evening or the afternoon, it's okay. 50. Okay. Trumas Hadeshan says that if you're aware that it's Shabbos, you just don't remember, your mouth got ahead of you, then you continue right away to Yismach Moshe. 51. Okay. So he says like this. Since you know it's Shabbos, therefore you don't have to complete the blessing. So he brings down like this. Because the word Ata is also the beginning of the bracha designated for Ma'ariv and Mincha on Shabbos, it is as though you erred in confusing Shachris for Mincha or Ma'ariv, but within Shabbos itself, because you're aware it's Shabbos, in which case you should interrupt and begin the appropriate bracha. So therefore, we don't have to complete the bracha. We would just finish the switch over right away to Yismach Moshe if you just said the word Ata, because you could attribute it to Mincha Ma'ariv, not attribute it to a weekday blessing. Now, I think we're going to learn in a second. I think we learned before that the idea is that it's not we don't want to ask for weekly things on Shabbos. But it's not like it's totally forbidden to ask those things. Therefore, we continue the blessing. And here he goes into the case of like this: Im loy niskar. Ad bibrachos ha'achronos. Let's say you've davened the whole weekday during Shabbos. Means you've done the entire Amidah as if it was the weekday, not catching yourself. And now you're holding the Ritzei, the last 3, hey Rebecca, the last 3 blessings. So you're ready, basically, the last 3 blessings are the same blessings you would say on Shabbos also. And you've already completed the entire Shmona Esrei. So what do you do then? Paisek be'emtza bracha b'makom sheniskar. So then you stop right away, mid-blessing. Shabbos, and you go back to whatever the blessing should start with for Shabbos. If it's the evening, you start with Ata Kidashta. If it's the morning, you Smach Moisha. And if it is Mincha, you'd say Ata Echad. A Yom Tov, or if it's the Yom Tov, then you continue the Shemona Esrei as if it was Yom Tov. What happens if you've completed the final blessing, Sim Shalom, and you've already just started to say Yil Ratzin, which is kind of the closing statement before you finish the Amidah? So then you can't just go back to Yismach Moshe, Chazil Rosh Tefillah, you have to start all the way from the beginning. So here he gives us in law number 18, he gives us that you have basically, the questions, what we're trying to figure out is like this, is when do you have to stop mid-blessing? When do you complete the blessing? And when do you have to start from the beginning? Meaning to say, if you are middle of one of the requests, which are the middle blessings between the first three and the last three, you start to say the weekday, and you're saying in the middle of the weekday and you catch that it's Shabbos, you complete the blessing, and you start saying whatever the appropriate blessing for Shabbos would be. In the evening would be Ata Kidashta, in the morning Yitzmach Moshe, and the afternoon Ata Echad. If you're holding, you just said the word Ata, and you're aware it's Shabbos, you just go right into the blessing. If it's not aware of Shabbos and it's Shachars, you complete the blessing Ata Chonen. If in the case that you've said the entire Midah, and now you're holding the last three blessings, so you don't complete the blessing. You stop wherever you are and go back to the beginning of the special Shabbos blessing, meaning Yismach Moshe or Ata Kidashta. You don't start from all the way at the beginning. If you've completed the entire Shemona Esrei, you haven't yet taken the 3 steps back, but you start to say Yil Ratzin, which is the kind of the final line when in completing after Sim Shalom. So then you have to also start from the beginning of the Shemona Esrei. You can't just switch over from there to Yismach Moshe. You kind of completed, and now you have to start again. Right? Those are the rules. Again, it may seem very technical, but unfortunately, it's something that we face all the time when we're not davening with our full focus. So if he says over here, what does it mean Yil Ratzon? I believe that's the footnote. 52. He says some of the later poskim held that it depends on whether or not you concluded saying Yihu Liratzon. If you have to complete saying the Yihu Liratzon, not just beginning to say it. So then, but he started to say until after you started to say Yilu Ratzon, which means may they be acceptable. Some say Yilu Ratzon twice, once before Elokai Nitzar and once after. This halach is based on the concluding Yilu Ratzon Eliyahu Rabbah. So which Yilu Ratzon are we talking about? Not the Yilu Ratzon after Sim Shalom, but the Yilu Ratzon after Elokai Nitzar if you're saying it twice. Okay. Now, so we've addressed the cases, the laws of the cases where a person has made a mistake in the 3 main tefillos, which we do every day. Just Shabbos has a special tefillah. In the morning we say 1 tefillah, in the afternoon we say a 2nd tefillah, and the evening we say a 3rd tefillah, I mean the evening before, Friday night. But we have a 4th prayer that we pray on Shabbos. That's the Musaf. Again, the prayers that we have are in correspondence to the sacrifices. The sacrifice of the Musaf is the special sacrifice. Musaf means the additional sacrifice that we have on every Shabbos. And we have the additional sacrifices on the Chagim, on the Yom Tov. So here he says, B'tfilas ha-Musaf, ha-Musafim. What happens if you make a mistake on Musaf? Now you can attribute it to kind of a weekday prayer because we don't have the Musaf in the weekday, unless it's a Rosh Chodesh or a Chol HaMoed. So what do we do then? So he says, B'tfilas ha-Musafim, im tov b'birchas emtzu'is shel choil. Let's say you start with Ata Chonen, when you should be saying the Ata Yitzarta, or the tefillah for Musaf. Is poisek be'emtza bracha b'makom bracha sheniskar ba u'maschel b'bracha emtzai shel tefillah Musaf. Then you do not complete the blessing. You stop immediately as soon as you're aware that's Shabbos and start the Musaf. You have no business completing that blessing because there is no 4th prayer in the weekday. So this 4th prayer, this middle 4th prayer, I call it the middle because it's not the final prayer of the day. There's a mincha afterwards. but it's the additional prayer, has no business to be said in the week. So you have no business saying the Amidah 4 times. So therefore you stop immediately and you go into the blessing of the Musaf of Shabbos. The reason we said before why you can continue to say the blessing is because in theory you could have said the weekday blessing on Shabbos. It's just that we wanted to sanctify the Shabbos with a special blessing, so we changed the nusach, we changed the language of the blessing. But there would be no musaf in the weekday, so there's no business to say that. So therefore you stop right away and you just start with the musaf prayer. Musaf, you right away go into, there's only the musaf, there's no business to have the weekday prayer. He says in footnote number 54, this is the ruling of the Rambam and the Smag, which are commentaries. Okay, now we finished with the laws of what you do. In law number 20, he gets into what is the spiritual meaning of a person who does this mistake. So he says, again, we spoke about this last week. He says, Mi sheta v'hischel tfilos shachol b'Shabbos. What does this mean if a person is a person who's forgetful that it's Shabbos or allows even their mouth to get ahead of them? So he says in Shulchan Aruch, in the laws, Siman Ra Loi. It's a bad omen. It's a bad sign for the person. There's a bad energy. You should be focused on Shabbos. Siman doesn't mean it itself is bad. It's a sign that there's something there, that kind of a subconscious fixing that you need. And therefore, he says, he's not just telling you what's your situation, but what you should do about it. Examine your actions, find what you could do within your routine, within your day that needs fixing. You should do repentance. So examine your deeds during the coming week and repent. So basically, what law number 20 is telling us, which is interesting, is that, so to say, your forgetfulness or mispronunciation of the word for the tefillah is your subconscious telling you that you have some things that need to be rectified and fixed. Examine what those things are, find them, identify them, and try to fix them and do repentance for the things that you've done that need repentance for. And this is, he quotes from the Shalom. Okay, so that's again, some people there's things that are in Torah that have this concept of yifash v'shemasa. A person, other times it says, for instance, of things the Rambam quotes, if a person goes through difficulties in life, it's also a good time to examine the happenings of what's going on in their life. Okay, law number 21. Now we've dealt with what happens if a person mixes week with Shabbos. I think, again, I don't want to get into the svara, into the Kabbalistic, into the spiritual meaning of Simon Rahuloi, it's a bad sign, but clearly from the next law we see that it's the weekday mixing into the Shabbos is that the sign is. I mean, it's not that people are forgetful, but Shabbos, a person should be elevated to a spiritual higher reality. And if you're still attached to the week, the 6 days of the week, which are in Torah, we know that there's the energy of Shabbos and the energy of the week. It's two separate energies. So if you're connected to the energy of the week during Shabbos, that's not a good thing. The next law we're going to go into, what happens if you make a mistake within Shabbos itself? Meaning to say that instead of saying the Shacharis, you say the Mincha, or vice versa. So there you're not confusing weekday energy with Shabbos energy, you're just kind of confusing the Shabbos itself. Obviously, if you have a Siddur and you look in your Siddur, that would happen less often. So he says, what happens to Brachem Tzois Shal Tefillah Shabbos Mizulazu? Let's say on Friday night you start Yismach Moshe. Or Friday night you start Ata Echot. That could happen because it's Ata. So you've not made a bad choice. You have not made a mistake with Shabbos. You've made a mistake within Shabbos, not Shabbos and the week. So what do? So if you haven't completed the blessing, you haven't said Baruch Atah Hashem, so go back to whatever the proper blessing is. So if you're in the evening, go back to Ata Kidashta. If you're in the morning, go back to Yismach Moshe. And if you're in the afternoon, go back to Ata Echad, as long as you haven't completed the blessing. If you've already completed saying God's name, Baruch Atah Hashem, Mekadesh HaShabbos, you complete the blessing, and you don't go back to the beginning of the blessing that you should have said. Why? Because the first part of the blessing that we say differently, evening, morning, and afternoon, that's kind of the energy of the time of the day. But the day itself, the Shabbos part of it, that we say the same thing. We say the Elkeinu v'Elkeinu, Ritzeinu b'nu Chaseinu. Ritzeinu b'nu Chaseinu is the main blessing. And that we say pretty much the same words besides the boy, bosh, abasais. There's a few little changes that we have with Mincha and Shachris and evening. So those differences, I guess, are not enough to change, to do the blessing again, because the main blessing is that we're blessing God for giving us a day of peace. And it's pretty much equal in all the tefillos. So therefore, we don't, if you've already completed the blessing and you've just made a mistake between the blessings themselves on Shabbos, because the central blessing, the main blessing is the Ritzei, blessing God for giving us his blessing of menucha, of peace, of rest. So therefore, that's enough, and that covers the tefillah, the blessing that we have to make. So you would not return, you would not make the blessing again. He says in footnote number 56, this is the psak of the Magen Avraham. Okay, let's continue. So when is this applicable that we just say Mekadesh HaShabbos and that's it, finish the blessing, we don't go back, is only in the prayers of evening, morning, and afternoon, Avos Shachris and Mincha. However, what about the Musaf? The Musaf has a special tefillah. We have to talk about that extra sacrifice. Ava b'tfilas Musaf, if by mistake, during the Musaf you say Shachris Mincha or Ma'ariv tefillah, you can't just say Mekadesh HaShabbos and continue. You haven't done the Musaf prayer. The Musaf prayer, clearly we talk about the Musaf sacrifice. Therefore, Musaf, you haven't mentioned the Musaf sacrifice. Or vice versa, if you by mistake pray the Musaf during it's not in the non-appropriate time, meaning in evening, afternoon, and the morning. You can't apply that blessing, that prayer towards the evening, afternoon, or morning. However, Musaf, because you mentioned the sacrifice. And you're saying a lie because it's not that time of the sacrifice, and therefore you're not yotzer, and you have to say the prayer again. So he says like this: in both instances, if you remember, now the question is, he doesn't say what you should do, right? Meaning, what do you do? He just says that you're not yotzer. So what do you do technically? So now he says in both instances, meaning to say, what's both instances? If in the evening, afternoon, morning, you prayed by mistake the Musaf prayer, or during the Musaf you prayed the evening, afternoon, and morning prayer. This is in both instances if you remembered before Yiyul the Ratzain, like during the week. So you return to the middle bracha, you start again. You don't go all the way back to the beginning. You just start from the beginning of the Musaf prayer. And if you said Yiyul the Ratzain, you must begin the Shemona Esrei over again. If you substituted another tefillah for Musaf and remembered in the middle of Ritzei, when you say V'hashev es avoida, you add V'nasa chayvayseinu b'tmida yom v'kab Musaf lefanai, and that's enough. So that's a ruling of the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah says, basically, you could make a quick addition in the Ritzei that would mention the Musaf, and that would be good enough to cover the Musaf prayer. Something similar to what we have in the benching. In the benching, if we forget the Ritzei, so you have a little one line you could say that would add for the Shabbos or Yom Tov. Okay, we have one last law in this Siman, and then we're going to turn to the laws of Kiddush. He says, Im ta b'tfilas Yom Tov. What happens if you make a mistake on the holiday, not Shabbos? You were supposed to finish off the blessings of the holiday with God who sanctifies the Jewish people and its times, meaning to say the Zmanim is the blessings for the holidays. And instead of that, you made a mistake and you didn't do a weekday, but you finished off Mekadesh Shabbos. If you're still within Shalom Aleichem Rabbi Moiri, like we said, that's a few seconds. You're within a few seconds of that pronunciation. You could quickly change it, rectify it, and say Mekadesh Shabbos Zmanim, and it's fine. If you only remember afterwards, you have to start again from the holiday prayer. Okay, so this is a mistake if you make mistake between Yom Tov and Shabbos. It says that what does it mean toch dibur, within amount of time? So we said already before, the time it takes to say Shalom Alai Rebbe, or Rebbe Shalom Alai, which is 3 words. Most Achronim and the Mishnah Brura, the Pri Megadim, say the words Shalom Alai Rebbe Umoiri, 4 words. And if not, you must go back to the start of Atar B'Chartanu. If you start to say, you still have this allotted time to correct yourself. However, Bir Halacha disagrees. If you, as soon as you said the word Ritzei, it's too late and you have to go back. Okay. Let's go to the next laws. This completes the laws of Shabbos. Before we go to the laws of Kiddush, anyone have any question on the laws of the prayers? Okay. Now, these are the interesting laws because it gets a little complicated with Kiddush and I went to look into a few things. Number one is with regard to obligation of making Kiddush on wine versus grape juice. What is the opinion of making Kiddush on grape juice, etc. But we'll get to all that. So now we're learning Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, chapter 77, the laws of Kiddush and Shabbos meals for the night and day. Sif number Aleph. Mitzvah saseh min Torah. It's a biblical commandment. The Kaddish is Yom Shabbos b'dvarim, to sanctify the day with words. Dvarim means with words. That's the Kiddush. The Kiddush is the words. Shneimar zachar es Yom Shabbos HaKadosh. You should remember. And how do you remember? Kloimar zachreu zchir Shabbos b'Kiddush. Sanctify it with the words of sanctification, of saying what we say, the blessings before we eat the meal. V'tzarich l'zachreu b'knisasai. We have to remember the main Kiddush is the Kiddush where we enter into Shabbos, b'Kiddush, v'gam mitziyasei b'Havdalah, and also when we leave the Shabbos with the Havdalah service that we do at the end of Shabbos. V'tiknu chacham, and the rabbis have added tzchira al kos yain, meaning biblically one could say Kiddush, just the words of Kiddush. The rabbi said that how do we, so to say, elevate the Kiddush to be within the meal itself, is to do it on a cup of wine, which is a special drink. Wine is a unique special drink. It's not just water. They said best to do Havdalah and Kiddush on wine when you enter and leave the Shabbos. Okay, we're going to learn about all the laws, and when it comes to Havdalah, what are the rules? We all know that the Havdalah is not as strict as the Shabbos. We could make Chomer Medina. We can use teas or coffees, or depending on what is considered a unique drink of the location. People make on beer. We don't do that Friday night. No one makes Kiddush on beer or tea on Friday night. We make Kiddush on, best case scenario, if you can't have alcohol, is you make grape juice. Okay, where's the biblical? It says that in Exodus. Number 2 is the sages added that should be done on wine. So he says some poskim hold the Kiddush over wine is also biblical obligation. So the Rambam says, Maimonides says that the wine part of the Kiddush is rabbinic. However, Rashi in Maseches Brachos and maybe others hold that wine on the Kiddush is also biblical. By the way, if it's biblical or not is not just the question what kind of mitzvah you're fulfilling. It also changes the variables of who's obligated to do it on wine and how it affects women, children, etc. Okay, so he says we're going to learn Kitzur Shulchan Aruch-Chapter 96.3 for how we make Havdalah. Okay, next halacha. before we get into the what you make Kiddush on, the what kind of wine, the question is, when do you make Kiddush? It says, Yoichin lekadish le'echol, one can make Kiddush and eat Friday night, we're talking about. Alpha pisha dain eni laila. Let's say you're taking Shabbos early, which we discussed the laws before. Someone who takes Shabbos in early, so of course you don't have to wait. Typically, you don't have to wait till it becomes night to eat. You daven Mariv, you light the candles, you daven Mariv, you take in Shabbos early, let's say in the summer. And when you get home, or if you're home the whole time, you make Kiddush and you eat. It's not technically Friday night yet, it's still midday of Friday, but you've accepted Shabbos in early, so you could say the Kaddish. Meaning, one would think that because Kiddush is sanctifying the day, maybe you don't have the power to sanctify. You have to wait till the actual Shabbos comes in to sanctify it. You say, no, once you've accepted Shabbos on yourself, even though technically it's still Friday, it hasn't entered the Shabbos yet, but you were moisif Shabbos l'chol, you've added Shabbos into the week, and therefore you're saying the Kiddush that Friday night, even though it's day, is you've fulfilled your biblical obligation of making Kiddush on Shabbos. However, there's one problem. Like we said, even a person who during the week in the summer does wait until it becomes night to daven the Ma'ariv, it's only Shabbos that you want to take it in early. As we spoke in the previous chapter. So Elu asurin le'echel mishegia chati shah kodim chitzeis hakachavim. If it's within a half hour of the stars coming out of it becoming dark, so once it enters the last half hour, you have to refrain from eating, wait till it becomes night, and then make Kiddush. Meaning to say, because you usually don't accept the next day until the actual night, and only Shabbos took it in early, and it's within a half hour. We're going to see the explanation for it in the footnotes. So then you would have to remain. Again, the half hour, I'm assuming, is not 30 minutes, but half hour of shazmanis. Meaning to say, in the summer, we've learned, right, the day is always divided into 12 parts, 12 day hours, depending on summer, winter, how many minutes is in the hour. Obviously, half hour is half of those minutes. Okay. Excuse me. If a person, by the time they're ready to make Kiddush, it's within a half hour until it gets dark, you must wait until it gets dark. Then you have to say your biblical obligation of the Shema. Means to say, if you have more than a half hour, so the ruling would be is you could make Kiddush. You haven't kind of entered into the night time yet, so the whole Shabbos kind of goes early. You make Kiddush, you eat, and then you say the Shema because you haven't said Shema at night yet. Means to sanctify the weekday, make it Shabbos, doesn't make it night. It just makes that these day hours are Shabbos. But the obligation to say the Shema daily at night doesn't change. You can't say it early. You have to say it once it becomes dark. So you always have to say the Shema once it becomes dark. But you don't have to say the Shema now. You can wait till, if you started your meal a half hour before, with more than a half hour to go, so then you could continue eating and say the Shema later. However, if you usually daven Shema on time, and it's only Shabbos you took it early, and there's only 30 minutes till the dark, you can't push off the biblical obligation of saying the Shema. You must first say the Shema, which is the three parshas of V'ahavta, V'hoya, and Vayomer. And only then you could say the Kiddush. But and you may not taste anything. I mean, no water, before Kiddush. So you can't drink anything. It's more because you hadn't made the Kiddush yet. You can't eat anything. You have to wait that half hour. Then you could eat, and you say the Shema, and then you could eat. Make Kiddush and eat. Okay, let's see the footnotes on this law. So he says that you may make Kiddush even though it's not night. The Mishnah Brura in a law 267:1 says it is preferable to eat at least one kezayis of bread after nightfall, which is also the ruling of Sefer Hasidim and the Maral. So this is a problem. Let's say in places like Seattle, New York is not maybe as extreme, but places like Seattle where you could take in Shabbos at 5 o'clock, make Kiddush at 6 o'clock. It doesn't become dark until 10 o'clock, you plan to be long asleep by then. So this would be a hard law to fill. He says it's not obligated. It says it's preferable. But if the idea is to have 3 meals, there's two separate laws here. One law is to sanctify the entrance of Shabbos and the exit of Shabbos with words, and the rabbis, most opinions added that those words should be done over wine. The kiddush could be done before. The kiddush has to be done with the meal that we've learned that you do kiddush makom suda. The next obligations we have that Shabbos one should eat 3 meals. So even though you've eaten your evening meal in the daylight of Friday, it's preferable once it becomes dark night on Friday night to eat at least a zayis, which is in a minimal amount of bread, not that much. So you've eaten bread on the actual Shabbos itself. It doesn't say you should drink wine or do anything about the Kiddush. The Kiddush has been done. You're totally Yotze. But as far as the meal goes, preferably, so we see that even though we're taking Shabbos in early, and as far as Kiddush goes, you've 100% covered your obligation, it's preferable to still have the 3 meals on the proper Shabbos time. Again, if you're living in a place where Shabbos comes in places like Northern Europe or in Alaska and Seattle, places, Vancouver, that Shabbos really comes in late in the summer, it may not be an option to wait up that long and eat bread at 11 o'clock at night. But if it's in a situation that you can, it's preferable that you should. Okay, footnote number 5 is, what happens if you typically daven Friday at nights, Ma'ariv on time, and on Friday night you davened early, and it's within a half hour? So he says like this: however, one should not rebuke those who are lenient and see shar ha'tzion, meaning to say, if someone is not careful in that and doesn't wait that half hour, there's no need to get all extreme and overreact. Just leave it. Okay, doesn't say why. Okay, footnote number 6 and 7. So you cannot drink water in that half hour that you're waiting. So he says, this is true once it gets dark, or if you ushered in the Shabbos while it was yet daytime. At twilight, it is also forbidden. Even from what's called Ben Hashmashis, one should not drink. But Das Torah rules that one may be lenient in cases of discomfort from thirst. If you're really thirsty, and let's say you're waiting for your husband or the man in the house or your guest to make kiddush, if you're the one making kiddush and you're in real discomfort, then one could have a drink of water. It says you may rinse your mouth with more than a revius of water, but with other liquids only less than a revius. Another question is, if you want to just rinse your mouth out, if it's water, it doesn't have to be a minimal amount of a revius, but if it's other liquids, make sure it's not more than revius, which is what's considered a proper swallow. So you don't want to have a proper swallow, even if you're not swallowing, you're just rinsing your mouth. To better not have a revius of wine of other liquids in your mouth. Again, if you're in a situation where you're in major discomfort and you're waiting for someone to make kiddush, so you have that times. It happens all the time where you have guests coming into your house on Friday night. If you're a guest in someone else's house on Friday night and you're very thirsty, and your guests are late and it's already dark and you're ready to make kiddush, and so it's there's always the question: do you wait for your guest and continue in your or your family's discomfort, or if you make kiddush and let your guests do their own kiddush, or if you have to make kiddush for them again? So that's always the political question. What is the appropriate behavior? So most people try to wait, but if everyone's waiting for a few guests, or if your family's discomfort, then logic would be to make kiddush. And if you have a question, especially people getting antsy around the table, you have children, so and especially if you called the meal for a certain time and that time has passed and your guests haven't come, so you don't have to feel guilty that you weren't polite. You gave it time, and if that time comes, it's usually understood in most circles that the household will make kiddush, and not necessarily wait for the guests. I know it becomes an issue when you have a lot of guests, so people want to know how to behave in these situations. Again, every situation you just have to make the best judgment call. with all the variables. But if people are discomfort and there's agony, there's no reason to be strict. And either he says you could have a drink of water, or if you could make the kiddush if those people are, if the guests are keeping you waiting. Okay. Now the question is, what do you make kiddush on? So he says like this. I just learned the Gemara actually because I'm studying the Talmud of Megillah. The Gemara Megillah talks about that the major schusim. It says, I'll read a little bit the Gemara. The major schusim, the major merits that people have had because they were diligent to make kiddush specifically on wine. It says, the Gemara says that Shol Tamidavis Reb Zakkai, the students asked Rabbi Zakkai that what was one of the things he did in his life that he merited for a long life. So he says different things, and then he says, "V'lo bitalti kiddush hayoim." He said he never gave up the opportunity to make kiddush. He says his old mother once she had no money for wine. She sold her scarf, her headscarf, so her son could buy wine. And it said because of that, by the time she passed away, she left 300 barrels of wine, meaning because of the merit of even selling something for wine to be able to make the kiddush. She was blessed with wealth, 300 barrels of wine. And the time he passed away, he left his children 3,000 barrels of wine. So we see the blessing you have of being diligent in making kiddush. Rav Huna says that he once came before Rav, and his pants were being held up by a twig, by a straw, because he had no belt. So Rav asked Rav Huna, "What's with the belt? Where's your belt?" So he says, "I gave my belt as collateral so I could buy wine." He had no money for wine, and Rav blessed him that he should have an abundance of blessing, and he should be dining on scarves of silk, which is a sign of success, and he lived up to that level of success because he was very diligent to make kiddush. So the idea of making kiddush and making kiddush on wine is very important. So here we're going to learn about the making kiddush on wine. So he says, mitzvah l'kadosh al yain yashin. What type of wine should one use? Is to use old wine. Old wine is a higher quality of wine. Or mitzvah livrar yain yafa. Make sure you choose a quality wine, a good wine. V'mefshar, and if possible, yesh lahadar acher yain adam. Try to make kiddush if you can on red wine. We know that's our custom to try to rather make kiddush on red wine versus white wine. Over makim she'en yain kosher kiroi matzui. And let's say you cannot find proper kosher wine. So then you can make makachin gamal yain simukin. You can make on raisin wine. We'll see in a second what it means to make kiddush on raisin wine. And it says you make the veichulu. We all start Friday night. We say Yom Hashishi. We say veichulu shemayim. You should say it mu'umad. When you make kiddush, you must stand. We know there's different customs about how we make kiddush by day, standing or sitting. My father has the custom to stand. That was his grandfather's custom. Others, the Rebbe actually sat when he made kiddush by day. But by night, everyone stands by the veyachulu. Umistakel b'neiros, you should look at the candles. Again, the idea of looking at the candles, it gets into halachic questions of how much you should look at the candles. We'll see in a second. But one should look at the candles at least a little bit when you say the vayechulu. Again, the candles are supposed to bring light to the meal. And only then you should sit down. Some people have the custom, it seems like, to sit down when they make the actual kiddush. So they say the Yom Hashishi vayechulu, look at the candles, then they sit down, they make the Boa Piragafen and the bracha of kiddush. Umestaka b'kais, and then you don't look at the candles. By the blessing, you look at the cup for concentration. Umevarach Boa Piragafen, you make the gafen, asher kiddushanu, the blessing of kiddush, while you're sitting, according to this opinion. V'mein lo yayin. However, if you're in the situation you do not have wine, so you can make mekachin al pas, don't make kiddush without anything, you make kiddush on bread. V'loy al shai mashkin, but you do not make kiddush on any other liquids, soda, water, tea, beer, whatever, alcohol On Friday night, you do it on bread. If you don't have bread or wine, obviously, then you wouldn't make the kiddush you wouldn't be able to make the kiddush. You could maybe say the bracha with the I'm not sure with Hashem's name. Yes, Rebecca.
How do you do that exactly? Making kiddush on challah.
You wash for challah, and you'd say Yom Hashishi. Then you say the hamotzi, and then you make the bracha for kiddush, and you break and you eat the bread. But let's see if he yes, Barbara.
And is there a minimum amount of wine that you should make kiddush over?
Yes, a revius. A revius is about, I think it's 3 point something milligrams. I'll check it up exactly. It's a revius of wine. A revius of wine is like it's like a long shot of it's like a little it's like a double shot. But there's actually a number amount of what that shear is. I'll
Sorry,
yes.
I have a question about looking at the candles, but I could wait if you're in the middle of something else.
Yeah, let's do the footnotes and then we'll get back to the candles in a second.
Okay.
Okay, so now he says an interesting thing. The Tashbit says that if you have an option to use raisin wine or white wine, use raisin wine over white wine. Raisin wine is, we'll see in a second, we're going to go into the footnotes to the some options. What does it mean to make raisin? What is raisin wine exactly? If you're not suitable, then you can make on raisin wine. He says over here, perhaps the word suitable is intended to exclude white wine. See footnote number 8. Or wine only permissible because of great monetary loss. It means it costs you a lot of money to buy wine, so it's cheaper to use raisin wine. He says great. It means you can't just say, I don't want to spend $7, so I'm gonna, it's obviously great is within proportion. Yes, Rebecca.
But I know like a very prominent Rav, and he makes kiddush on like Moscato, I think.
White Moscato?
Yeah, it's sweet white wine.
On Friday night?
Yeah.
Okay, you have to ask him. It doesn't say this is preferable. It doesn't say it doesn't say it's usher to make on white wine. It says it's preferable. It says v'im efsher, if you can, yesh lahader, you could be diligent and use red wine. And here he says in the footnotes, the Tashbit says that raisin wine is better than white wine. And where it's unsuitable, he says it could be even the case where you only have white wine. So he's pretty strict about the Kitzure is pretty strict about the white wine, but he's again, it's a hiddur, it's not an obligation. Raisin wine is like this. Some hold, how do we make raisin wine? Some hold that the raisins must be crushed first and then allowed to stand for 3 days. We're not talking about, so it's not something you could just do quickly on the spot. It has to soak in the water for 3 days. And others disagree, which means, so that was the opinion of 3 days is the Shulchan Aruch-Chapter, meaning the Alter Rebbe, the Chabad. And however, others disagree, which is the Chok Yaakov, the Pri Megadim, and some hold that they should be cut up first. Doesn't explain what cut up first means versus crushed. The question is, I guess, the 3 days or not. How do you make this raisin wine? Again, he quotes this. The Shulchan Aruch says that the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch also says that the raisins must be soaked for 3 days. Okay, so it's not obviously something you could just do Friday night. You have to prepare for this. Now, about looking at the candles, you say the Vayechulu, he quotes the Ramah. Look at the candles. This is the Maharil. The Maharil is the father of Ashkenazic Minhagim. He lived about the 1300s. He quotes the minhag that one should look at the candles while he says the Vaychilu. We are not very how do you pronounce that? Punctualis about doing this according to the Mishnah Brura and Elia Rabbah. So not everyone's careful about looking at the candles. A lot of people look at the candles right before they say it helps for vision. Look at the candles when we say the Savrim Ranan. I'll get back to your questions on candles in a second, Rebecca. And then after you sit down, meaning to say you sit down before you say the actual Kiddush. That's as the Tosfos says in Masechet Brachos, the Rambam says in Sukkah, the Ravid Gra Chayadam Arizal, means Kabbalistic opinion is, stood for the entire Kiddush, and so do Kabbalists. So in Chabad, that's the Armenic Mohis. I think today most of the people stand for the entire Kiddush. We don't sit down after we finish the Vaychudu. And you're supposed to look at the cup of wine while you're saying the blessing. The reason for this is to help you concentrate on the Kiddush. Obviously, if you're reading out of a book, that's stronger to concentrate, meaning to say, if you're saying the Kiddush by heart, don't just look around, don't look at the candles because you have to concentrate. But obviously, if you're looking in the Sefer, in the Chassidr, that's obviously preferable. Footnote number 16 says, what are we talking about? If you don't have wine, you recite Kiddush over bread. So it says, even if it's very expensive, you must buy it. Means the Magen Avram holds that you can't get away with using bread just for money. Means you could use raisin wine over regular wine if it's very expensive, that we said before. But any type of wine, grape-based liquid wine versus bread, money is not an excuse. Okay, you make Kiddush over bread. So he says number 17, if you prefer bread to wine, you may use it for Kiddush in place of wine. So this goes kind of against what he said before. If you're a person who does not like wine and the question is not a money question, so then you can make bread over wine. A kazayis of bread is sufficient if that is all you have. So if you have just a small amount, which is a zayis, again, it's very small, that's enough. It doesn't have to be an entire challah. Happened there. Okay, 18 is, so it says this, when making Kiddush over bread, you must rest your hands on the bread until you complete the Kiddush. So you connect it to the washing. So you're not supposed to, you have your hands on the bread the entire time you're making the Kiddush. Okay, Rebecca. Barbara, Barbara, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah, I wanted you to repeat again, what was the process for making the blessing for Kiddush with the challah? You said say Yom Shishi,
Yes, you have to first wash your hands.
right?
And then you make the Yom HaShishi. You have your hands on the bread the entire time. You say the Yom HaShishi, you say the Motzi Lechem Min Haaretz, the bracha, and then you say the blessing Baruch Atah Hashem as if you were making on the wine for Kiddush, and then you eat the bread.
Okay, thank you.
Rebecca.
Yeah. So first I have a question about so my dad, when he's in his 80s and probably he should be sitting for Kiddush, but he doesn't want to. He wants to stand up and he has like balance issues. So he needs to sometimes he needs to hold the table for support while he makes Kiddush. So I know probably he should sit down so that he could hold the kos, but he doesn't want to do that. So is that okay that he's like not holding the kos the whole time that he's making Kiddush?
You're saying the question is, if he has to choose between sitting down and
Or
holding
standing, right, or standing and letting and not holding the kos the whole time.
That is a good question. I have to think about it.
Okay, maybe like for the psukim, maybe he could put it down, but for the bracha, really, he should hold it or something like that. I don't know.
Listen, listen. The minute people are very careful with minhagim, the Arizal says to stand, so maybe he wants to be makbid on that.
Yeah, because he said it's like giving testimony, like that Hashem
Yeah.
created the world. And then my question about looking at the candles is, so again, let's say I'm away for Shabbos, or never mind, let's say I'm home for Shabbos, but I'm eating dinner at a family and they want to start like right when the men get home from shul. So I light the candles, but I have to leave before it's like fully dark. So is it important to like look at the candles once it's already dark? Because like sometimes I come home and they went out already.
Okay, so you're talking about in a situation is you left the house before it became dark,
Yeah,
and you left the house before it became dark. Well, first of all, you're enjoying the lights of the house that you're eating in.
right.
So, and we've learned that, we've covered that, I think, before. What do we do if a person leaves? Preferably, you should light the candles where you eat. But unless you come home and there's going to be the candles lit, so it brings benefit to your house, or to try to stay in the house and take some benefit before Shabbos. But if it's in a case where you can't, and you can't in any of the scenarios, you're not going that early to the guest, and you're not to the house, and you're not, so you would light in your house, stay as long as you can, and when you have to leave, you leave, and you enjoy the light that it brought into your house kind of spiritually, and you'll enjoy the light in the house that you eat in.
Okay. Is it better to light where you're eating or where you're sleeping in general?
It depends. It depends how long the light's going to be lit. Means if you could come home and you take benefit of the light, and when you come home, then that's where you are. If it's in a place where you're going to, if in any way you're not going to benefit from the light, maybe it's better to light in the house that you live in, that you're eating in.
I recently bought these 6-hour candles so that I won't have this issue, but I
There
was
you
just
have. That's
curious
perfect.
what to do. Okay, thank you.
Never heard of 6-hour candles. That's great. Yes, Barbara.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to know where she gets 6-hour candles. My question is, what is the Vohulu prayer? Because when I say when I light candles, I say the blessing over the candles, but I've never heard of this other prayer.
The Vayichulu is in Genesis, in the beginning, we have the first 6 days of creation. On the seventh day, it says Vayichulu, God completed creation, and he rested on the Shabbos. So Yom HaShishi, on the 6th day, God completed and he rested. We say that before the Kiddush. That's part. Vayichulu is, we start with Yom HaShishi. We say every Friday night, we say Yom HaShishi. The 6th day has been completed. Vayichulu, and God completed creation on the 7th day. Vayichulu is the part of the Chumash that talks about God resting on the 7th day. So, like Rebecca said, we say the Vayichulu. We learned it because we say testimony that
Okay.
of
So
creation.
so what verse is that in Genesis? That's the first chapter of
But,
Genesis.
but that would be in your siddur, anyways, for Kiddush.
Do you know what page it is? Because I'm looking.
If you, again, I'm looking at an old Chabad siddur. I don't know about what siddur you have, an old Chabad siddur, meaning the basic one, non-English one. So you would, first of all, you say the Vayichulu in the Amidah in the Friday night, in the Shemona Esrei. Then we say again the Vayichulu in the synagogue. And then on page, I don't know what siddur you have, but on page
I have the Siddur to Tehillat Hashem.
yeah, but then which one is it? The blue English one?
Yeah, the blue Hebrew English one.
Yes, I don't know the page over there because there they changed the pages. But if you look at the index and say Friday night Kiddush, so go to that page, and the Kiddush will start with we'll start with chapter 23 of Tehillim, the Mizmor LeDavid, after the Shalom Aleichem. You know where you say the Shalom Aleichem and the Eshet Chayil?
Yes.
So after Shalom Aleichem and Eshet Chayil, there will be the Mizmor LeDavid, which was the little things we say quietly, and some parts of the Zohar that we say before Kiddush, and then the Kiddush starts Yom HaShishi, which is really the last two words of the God has created the world on the 6th day, and then we say Veichulu Hashemayim. So that's the Veichulu that we're talking about.
Okay, I will find it. All right.
All right,
Thank
guys.
you.
So we're gonna stop here. Next week we're gonna start about. I wanted to bring up about the question of grape juice. We all have the question of grape juice because not everyone can have alcohol, and the same question applies to the 4 cups, which we're coming up to with the Seder. Can one do it on grape juice? It's interesting, just a small point. This fellow seems to say that grape juice actually came about, what we know as grape juice, Kedem grape juice, which is, there's a difference between the grape juice that you buy in the stores that has different preservatives and literally taking a bunch of grapes, squeezing it until you have a revius of liquid, which means it's 100% grape juice with no preservatives, squeezing enough. It's not alcohol because it hasn't fermented yet. It's literally just like a juice, but it's actually grape juice. That's the most preferable 100% grape juice. All this kedem stuff, the stuff that has the preservatives and all kind of stuff that is put into it, there's questions about it. It seems that the issue of grape juice came up in Prohibition. when in America they didn't allow alcohol, and there was a question if you could. There was an exception. They had a whole thing to try to make an exception for the times we need wine for bris, and other times to accept the 4 cups. What did they do in the times of prohibition? But that's when grape juice came out, and the question of grape juice and the halachic questions of grape juice, if grape juice is considered yayin wine in order to be able to be yotze with okay, thanks. You posted the candles. With grape for kiddush or for the 4 cups on grape juice. So we'll get to grape juice, Mirza Shem, beginning of next week's class. Laila Tov, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take
Shabbat
care.
shalom.